I'm not there yet.
I'm there.
I'm not there.
Yes.
Oh, I feel like,
I'm really glad I asked.
all of my different, like,
There's no,
a lot of like
planner.
scenarios that need to start to plan for
Did you
and.
guys share, we've already been in discussion with them to join them. They would join. This is a bit more open-ended, sort of bigger picture, and then sort of like site plans and scenarios, they will also.
Right.
Okay, good.
What are we doing?
Right.
Right, just trying to close some of the gap.
Yes, no, we want you all to be to hear directly from the planning team,
Yeah.
especially as we get into more detailed information.
Yeah.
To leverage. I'm like, we gotta start thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
We want to get things done quickly in the next 4 years. This is where my mind is going.
No, it's good. It's right. Those are the right.
No,
I like.
I had no idea. How did I miss that?
You actually are with that.
That's what I thought.
I think they like, yeah.
So cliche. Like you have to like.
No, but that's like, that's weird. Person involved in. all
I
that.
had no
Like,
idea.
Like 20.
We prefer in person.
Okay.
Always.
Yeah.
If you need to join virtually in future meetings, that's.
Maybe 3 million people.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's after a small.
Yeah, but I'd rather do the thing because you can choke me right now, Chris. And over Zoom, you can't choke me.
You know,
I want to
that's
choke
part
me
of
at
the
some
community.
point.
No, but he can mute.
No choking.
No choking.
No choking.
When you're in the room, he can't mute you, but on.
I mean, I just finished the Vince McMahon documentary, so like I can pretend.
Wait, how is that? That's good.
It's very disturbing. It's very,
What made you, what inspired you? Were you a wrestling fan?
when I was younger,
Well,
When I was-
back in the Bruno Sammartino days and
No, I
stuff.
mean, like, but back when it was the WWF, when I was younger, my family was big, really big into wrestling.
I went to the first WrestleMania where I stood T and all of them. Yeah.
But I think things that basically after watching this documentary, things got really.
We get to wrestling.
On from nice.
BMT documentary gonna end up.
Hopefully no choking.
There will be one.
Less Vince McMahon, possibly some Trump. I don't know. He does show up in the last episode.
Oh.
So be prepared if you're triggered.
The uber narcissistic.
Okay, I think we're gonna get started.
They're everywhere.
Thank you all for joining the first set of advisory group meetings. We're excited for this conversation. I think many of you know me, I'm Chris Rice with WXY. We're supporting the planning and engagement for the vision and for the green terminal process. I'm just gonna kick us off with a few sort of just like high level things and then kick it over to Michelle to kick off introductions. But some housekeeping things, just want to remind everyone we're recording this meeting. That was a request that came directly from the task force leadership to sort of improve transparency and increase transparency. And those recordings will be kept on the project website sort of through the GPP process. And then they would be taken down at the end of that. We also shared some information ahead of the meeting. In future meetings, we plan to share information further in advance, so you have time to review. So apologies for that. Yeah, and so today's meeting is really about making sure you all understand the engagement process and sort of what we're all working towards. At a high level, we want to sort of review and discuss sort of key priorities and constraints of the project, or at least the ones that have started to emerge based on the analysis so far. And then really having you all sort of share initial priorities and concerns to inform the planning team's work as we move forward. We'll do a little bit of introductions, quick sort of process overview and engagement summary of what we've heard thus far. Talk through some of the initial opportunities and constraints and really have the majority of the meeting be focused on sort of discussion and hearing from you all. We're going to try to talk as little as we can. We want to hear directly from you. And we want this to be conversational. So like, please interrupt me if there are questions as we go. It doesn't need to be formal. And we've got a couple of folks joining virtually. So, and I can't.
Are they there?
Yeah, I know Betty's there.
Okay.
We can't see you, so please definitely just chime in and we'll make sure to check in on you occasionally as well. With that, we'll kick it off with introductions.
Well, first off, welcome everybody to the Fact Center for Community Development. I know some folks have been here before, others perhaps not. So this is our home base, although obviously we're other places in the community. I know many of you, but I'm Michelle Delaus. I'm the executive director here at the Fifth Avenue Committee. As I was saying, I have the dubious honor of chairing the Community Development and Housing Committee. But in all seriousness, this project 122 acres along the waterfront is an important asset. And thinking how that asset can be used to benefit the community broadly in addition to advancing maritime goals is pretty much a once in a lifetime opportunity. So I really, appreciate everybody being here. I hope everybody is brutally honest about their thoughts and feelings about how this unique asset can really benefit a broader group of people, and what questions and concerns folks have. If you think I can be a resource, please feel free to reach out on things, but also just feel free to speak up. WXY, I've worked with them on various tasks in the past, and they're a very capable team as well. So with that, other things to know, the bathrooms are in that direction. And please help yourselves to some food and coffee and water. So
I'm Amy Breedlove. I'm from the Cobble Hill Association. I'm currently the chair of the Infrastructure and Waterfront Committee. I was the president for a couple of terms. I have worked in architects' offices that do affordable and supportive housing. And I know Michelle from a number of conferences that we've been together at. And I've served also on the Stonewall Development Corporation, which does housing for LGBTQ seniors. So housing has always been something I've been interested in. And from Cobble Hill's perspective, seeing that unproductive 122 acres near us always offered an opportunity for our community as well as the communities surrounding it and the greater community at large. So I'm excited about the opportunities.
And we have our icebreaker. I'll ask you to plug in as well.
okay. Oh, and you think, what is the first word that comes to mind? No. I think diversity. People, uses.
Really?
It's more than one word, but
Yeah.
10-minute neighborhood.
Are we shortened it? Wasn't it 15 minutes? Like, wow, even that was ambitious. Now we're at the 10
Well,
minutes.
I'm pushing it, you know me, always ask for 10, settle for 15.
Okay, hi, everybody. I'm Laura Bernbach. I'm the executive director of the Brooklyn Heights Association. We are neighbors with the Cobble Hill Association. It's possible that out of all the people here, we'll find out after the introductions that I have actually the least personal experience with housing. So I'll put that right on the table right away and admit what I don't know. The BHA has been involved in recent years. Well, we were involved with the development of Brooklyn Bridge Park when that first came on the scene. That was before my time with the organization. So there is a connection to waterfront use in that context. More recently, we've been very involved along with the CHA and probably others of you here or on the other task forces or advisory groups with the potential revamping. I was going to say reconstruction, but that's not my personal goal. So with the potential rethinking of the Brooklyn Queens Expressway, let's put it that way. Right. And how that intersects with the use on the waterfront is obviously very important. So I'm going to do my best to actually probably not say that much today because I feel like I have a lot to learn about housing issues in particular, but maybe I'll be able to chime in on some of the community development aspects. So thank you for involving me.
Hi, I'm Amanda Nichols. I, like Amy, am with the Cobble Hill Association. I'm currently the president of the Cobble Hill Association. I have been very involved in not just my own community, but I also serve on the board of the Red Hook Initiative. My kids are at school in Red Hook. I spend a lot of time up and down the corridor, and I'm involved in, I would say, less so on housing and more so on community spaces and opportunities for the community. So housing is not my specialty area, and Amy knows a lot more on that front than I do. But in terms of access and transportation and climate justice and public spaces and really the opportunities, my opportunity word, it's a phrase, but I would say quality of life. There are a lot of opportunities to improve the quality of life of people up and down this corridor. And when it comes to the climate change impacts, even beyond. So I'm really excited to be listening in predominantly on this advisory group, because I think this is where we're going to get some of the best quality of life improvements for the people in our neighborhoods.
Hey everyone, I'm Ben. I work with Carroll Gardens Association. I'm the deputy director there. Like we have a line of neighborhood association. And yeah, we've been in the neighborhood for 50 years. Our office is on Columbia Street, so right across the street from the site. And yeah, we manage and develop some affordable housing in Red Hook. Also, we have some buildings on Columbia Waterfront, Columbia Street, and then we also organize with tenants in the neighborhood. So we're very much, committed to housing justice. I just got this new hat actually from that.
Nice. Yeah.
Opportunity word. I think like there's such a opportunity in the context of housing for this site to really be rooted in housing justice, and we can discuss what that means, but
Right.
I have the hat.
From the conference.
Yeah.
I'm Maddie Rosenberg. I am officially, I think, representing of the Southwest Brooklyn Tenants Union, but also I am 63 Tiffany Place. I original tenant, been there 30 years looking at the waterfront. I am, and we actually began the union in the first place to really bring in our issues into the whole community, and what, as we saw, there was displacement and gentrification going on in the area during the years. I'm also an artist and curator, so I do work internationally. And again, lifestyle, it's very important for me, not just about housing, but also about the issues of quality of life as well, and cultural spaces as well within the community. So for me, housing means more than just, a place to live. It's a good start, and basically really looking for people who build up the community, not to be displaced by it.
Wait, are we not doing the one word? Because I was thinking by word.
Oh, sorry. I can't read that. I have my cataracts though.
You give us a word?
That's my excuse.
I did a phrase. I did quality of life.
Okay.
Is that the-
Housing justice.
Yeah.
I have to, that's not one word either.
I have one word.
Yeah, we didn't get your word either.
Phrases now.
My word is reclaim.
Oh, nice.
Hey, that's good.
Not going back.
You want me to have one?
Apparently we are.
I'll go along with you, justice, period.
Just, there we go. Hi, everyone. I am Paula Crespo. I am a senior planner at the Pratt Center for Community Development. I'm actually here in place of our executive director, Alexa Kasdan, because she couldn't be here today. But we work with low and moderate income communities across the city to help them try to achieve a more equitable future. And I guess my word is balance.
To me? Okay, John Laver, 63 Tiffany. I think Maddie and I, we live in the same building. I think we're the only ones that live like right across the street from our office, right? Like we're a half a block. We've been looking at it for years. We've been looking at what it could be. I see all kind of you go visit somewhere else, you see their beautiful waterfronts, and you're like, wow, man, we could have that. Instead, we have garbage trucks. We have a concrete recycling thing spewing out toxic dust now that they put there. It's been such a shame. And the Columbia Street waterfront has no access to the waterfront, which is insane, right? And so all these years we've been looking at it thinking, wow. And now, so we welcome this. We welcome a redevelopment. We were like, yes, finally. And my word is hope, because I hope we can do this. I hope we can all work together and we can do this in a way that benefits everybody, that we can do something and treat it. It's monumental. It's 122 acres of waterfront prime property that can really serve a lot of people, or it could be somebody's beautiful view, just a few people's beautiful view, or it can serve the whole Brooklyn and be a destination and something amazing. So I just hope we give it the time and effort and consideration that it deserves, that the community, I believe when you brainstorm ideas, magic happens. When everybody has their input, I want to hear everybody's thing. And so far in this process, we haven't had that. And I've been critical about that. Like even, and I hate to keep nitpicking, but for us to get like 38 pages of jargon that we don't really understand the day before and expect us to digest it and know what we're talking about, it says pre-read. That's Chinese to me. I don't know what bathymetry is. I looked it up. It's the depth of water or something. But I really didn't know what that was, and there's a lot of stuff in there. So to send it the day before, I don't know. Is that a tactic? Because I know that the meeting yesterday for Maritime, they got sent the day before. So you had at least 2 days in advance. Why didn't we get it as soon as it's done and just here, check this out, start reading this? And we can go back and ask people that we know that. So we just want to be a part of this process. It doesn't have to be so hard. Just let us be in this process. And I mean, that's all. And I just hope that we can do this together and we can make something amazing here. So that's my take.
Thank you. Well,
I'm Mallory. I'm a planner at WXY. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you all. It's been really great to hear feedback from the different groups that we've met with. My word for this project, I think, is access.
Great. Hi, everyone again. Chris Rice, WXY. My word, I think, is transformation. And we'll ask you to go next. We're just doing name, organization, and then this here.
Arif Samanu. I'm with
Oh, you were online. Just okay.
Yeah.
Now you're here.
I was biking here. I live in the community. I think I live with John over at 63 Tiffany Place. From Community Board 6. I think first word, I think opportunity. First off, I think that's a big word for me. But also imaginative. I think, yeah, we have a big opportunity. I really want to be innovative and creative with the solutions that we present.
Right. Thank you. And then Betty, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yes, hi everyone. I know I met a number of you, whether in person or virtual, but great to meet the rest of you. As Chris mentioned, I'm Betty Chow. I'm with EDC, and I recently joined the Government and Community Relations team dedicated specific to the BMT project. My one word, similar to Chris, would be transformative.
Great. Thank you, Betty. Okay. Now we're going to shift into water.
Thank you so much.
Just so we want to share some guidelines for productive dialogue, just in conversation, some basic guidelines here. So take space, make space. If you're speaking a lot, makes room for others. We encourage you to sort of speak from your own experience and avoid generalizations. We want you all to be active participants. So, acting as a collaborator and not a spectator. In that similar vein, we often throw out this, why am I talking or why aren't I talking? So just making sure that everyone has space to contribute to the conversation. Okay, now we're going to move into just a bit of process overview. I think it's important just to level set as we sort of enter this conversation. These are the project goals that were presented at Public Workshop 1. So I'm just going to read through them. Support a clean and modern maritime port that creates jobs and industry growth. Reduce emissions across operations and related activity, create new mixed-use residential development for the community, invest in neighborhood opportunities, and create open space and waterfront access, integrate EJ by addressing current and historic environmental inequities, complement and connect with the surrounding communities and neighborhoods, protect the site against increasing threats from climate change, improve mobility and mitigate traffic disruption, and critically support the long-term financial sustainability of the site. And so I think,
It's a long list of goals.
it's a long list of goals, and that has come up in sort of how can we achieve all of these within one site? But this is what the city is bringing to the table of the frame that it wants the community to work within. And so I think it's important just to revisit that.
Are we going to get a copy of this?
Yes, absolutely. And I think most folks are very familiar with the site, but just again, to level set, it runs from Pier 7 at the north, abutting Brooklyn Bridge Park, all the way south to Pier 12, including the Brooklyn Cruise Terminal. I think many of you also are familiar with the fact that the timeline was extended. This project was originally slated to end at the end of 2024, and was extended to March 2025. Obviously,
Everybody recognized that was impossible.
a lot of feedback on the timeline.
I still don't think it's enough,
Right.
to be honest,
And we've also gotten a lot of
off the bat.
on the new timeline. But just highlighting sort of what we feel like we've gained with that additional time is obviously more time for planning and engagement. There'll be more public workshops, which we'll talk through. We got a lot of feedback on the first workshop style, and so we wanted to be responsive to that. So we're planning different types of workshops moving forward, including opportunities for presentation, Q&A, small group discussion, work sessions. There's an additional task force meeting. And you'll see when we go through the engagement summary, we don't feel like we're hearing from a representative group of folks. And so we've already started to develop a strategy to bring in residents in particular, NYCHA residents in particular, Black and Brown communities. And so we can talk about that in more detail. And just wanted to show that there's a clear integration of our work with the master planning team. I think there's sometimes some confusion around sort of like what Borough Happold is doing versus what we're doing. And we're essentially one team, even though we're sort of under 2 separate contracts from EDC. We're meeting multiple times a week. We're feeding them everything that we're hearing. It's all going to the task force. So it is essentially one big team. We're leading on engagement. Borough Happold is leading on the sort of spatial and master planning. This is.
Can I ask you another thing to that? Like when they did the BQE thing, right? It reached out to nonprofits that know how to get to their people. And they did like, I think it was small grants or whatever. And then those people were able to reach out to the people. Right now, I don't know if you know how to get to some people here because you're not familiar with it. You don't have to, nothing you know. Why haven't they done something like that? Like, because we know our people better than anybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a short answer and a long answer. I think the short answer is we explored that sort of strategy at the beginning of the process. There was actually a lot of negative feedback from nonprofits who were engaged in the BQE process with how that worked, with having scopes of work and having deliverables and certain timelines. And so people felt really overwhelmed and overburdened by what was being asked. And so we tried to find a sort of different strategy and balance to sort of connect with groups. That's why we have such an extensive advisory group network. We've got 60 or 70 organizations involved just through this alone. And we're also asking folks to sort of share information. We're in talks with the tenant associations directly to potentially lead some engagement and also with Red Hook Initiative. So we are, I guess that's, I
think
yeah.
the other piece I would just say, John, like, there's always going to be, I think, criticism on process. I think if this committee or you as an individual have suggestions besides more time, and I know you do because you have many suggestions, very valuable. We can definitely bring that here and bring it directly to WXY. I mean, if we should be inviting particular groups of people, I mean, there are going to be several, because of the extended timeline, there is going to be a new public session, an additional public session. So we can think about how to do additional engagement and outreach to get more people there in addition to all the other sessions.
Is this up for discussion right now, or do you want to move on?
I would like to just give an overview of the process, but if there are specific things, definitely.
Well, I just have a concern because all of us in this room are representing really from tier 10 to 7.
Mhm.
And the site kind of naturally divides itself out between the finger piers and the marginal piers.
Mhm.
And I have a big concern about that because of maritime use, it kind of, from an urban planning perspective, looks like 10 and 11 and 12 should be the bulk of the maritime use. And then that offers flexibility in 7, 8, 9A and 9B. And I think that can lead to some inequities
Mhm.
that we need to deal with. And I'd like to just put that out on the table from day one.
Understood. I think that's something we can get deeper into in the next advisory group meeting, because I think there'll be more specific sort of spatial information to respond to that might address some of the things you're discussing, you're raising up. I guess just to quickly talk through the overall updated timeline, we anticipate the next round of workshops to happen in sort of mid-December, which will be focused on opportunities and constraints. And I will say this process is very iterative and it's evolving and changing. And so some of the content that we will share at that meeting we're sort of thinking through that now. I think we'll continue to change and develop. And we hope to sort of send out save the dates and registration in the next week or so. The set of workshops are Public Workshop 3, which I'll also show and talk through in a little bit more detail. We anticipate getting into some site planning exercises with the public, which I'm happy to talk through. And then the idea is that at the beginning of February, we'll actually have some set of final scenarios that the public can respond to and prioritize.
What does that look like, those exercises?
Yes, I'll have a slide that shows what I'm talking about.
Let me just say what we felt, right, in our community over there in Columbia Street, is that a lot of decisions were made with the first 3 members, right? And now that there's a full task force, some of those decisions should be revisited and voted on. That's democracy, right? Not just 3 members in a room. And I mean, I don't know, like when you've already picked the master plan, you kind of predetermined how this is going to go before it even started. Like, you know, if you want a consensus and you want everybody involved, okay, so now we made these decisions when nobody was here, when it was only just 3 of us. Now there's 28 or whatever it is. Let's revisit these decisions. And so I mean, a lot of stuff has been decided just before.
Which decisions are you?
Like I'm picking a master planner. What's the name of the master planner that's been picked up?
Earl Happold is leading the master planning team.
If you know what he does, I don't even look into it, but if you know that, you know, if you're still trying to steer it in a certain way, you pick the right guy. Why would that be picked with only 3 people?
It's not a
Yeah, and
company,
there's
it's a corporation,
I'm
but
sorry.
a company. But I think, John, if I might just jump in for a minute,
Sure.
I mean, democracy is about having representatives, right? You're not in the room when your council member makes a decision for the communities. So democracy isn't that everyone gets to vote on everything. It's about representation. And you're in the room now, and all of us are in the room now to represent our communities and bring that forward, but also go back to our communities, get their input, and make sure that we bring that into the process. And while we can all be skeptical of New York City government and what they're doing and what they have decided to do before we get into the room, I think they have learned that they can't move forward with things. They can't steamroll things like maybe they have in the past. So I think they're trying to get our input, but I think for us to be very productive in our input, because this is the only opportunity we're going to have. So if we spend that complaining or railing against the process, we're not going to give the input that we actually have an opportunity to give. And I understand that you're upset, and we have plenty of community members that are upset as well. But we keep telling them that the opportunity is now, because at least we're in the room and we have an opportunity to provide feedback, and hoping that it goes better than some of the past.
One last thing, and I'll be quiet after this. The biggest decision was using the GPP process, which is it's a very fast process, requires a lot less community input, and most importantly, doesn't get decided by the city council. That predetermined how far this can go, how long, what we can stop, what we can't, and everything. You disagree?
Yeah, maybe
We're
you
gonna-
two
we're
want
gonna-
to
we're gonna
talk about that.
Yeah, when are we gonna talk? That came up in the task force meeting as well, just so you know, and many people had the exact same questions and concerns. And just as background, you know, Fifth Avenue Committee was a founding member of Brooklyn Speaks, you know, which has been advocating around trying to bring accountability to Atlantic Yards, which went through the GPP process, you know, nearly 20 years ago. So I have a lot of experience with the GPP process, so successfully suing the Empire State Development Corporation for misuse of that process, and how to like try to make that process more responsive to our needs. I think there is, you know, whether we like it or not, there is a rational explanation as to why the city and the state, because it was a joint decision, right, came to the GPP process versus the ULURP process. Again, and I also sat on city planning for 9 years, so I understand the ULURP process really, really well,
Right.
and understands its strengths and limitations. So, you know, I think certain things, I'm not sure we're going to revisit, but I think we can try to bring accountability.
If I can add one thing really quickly, if that's okay. And this is, by the way, something that in the task force, we've also expressed that some things need to be explained
Yeah.
more clearly, publicly.
As to why.
But We have this opportunity because this agreement was entered into between the state and the city to do this land swap. And the GPP process, from my understanding, sort of what is making that a possibility. And so if we want to see something happen where we have input in this process, if we want to see something, if we want to have a great opportunity here, but to get this opportunity, agreements had to be made to make that land swap happen. And I just think, and I've said this, and we've all said this in the task force, some of this needs to be made more clear to the public about how and why certain decisions were made, because people understood we have this opportunity. Yes, there's something we don't like, but we would have no opportunity without it. I think it moves us to the next step of the conversation.
I don't really buy that. That was a decision that was made. They could have went to Europe. The GPP, Hudson Yards took 10 Europe's to do, so at least the parts that are not going to be maritime, maybe those should go through a Europe process, so it can be split up. But at some point, that just gives the community a way to decide. It's public land at the end of the day. They're not just, we should have some input, more input, as much input as possible into it.
But isn't there a zoning thing? I mean, I'm understanding that if we went with New York City zoning and the ULURP process, we wouldn't be able to get all these uses on one site.
There's some limitations. I mean, you do a large scale plan and it allows for more flexibility or special purpose districts. I mean, it's not impossible.
Right, it's not
It's not impossible, but I think it presupposes certain things which are not, the current circumstances. Like the swap that's being talked about, I don't know, I think we should put the swap on the table. Let's put the swap on the table. So do you want to talk about that? I don't know if Betty wants to talk about that.
Sure. I mean,
'Cause I do think that's important to understand as part of this, honestly. Like I was where you were, John, really was, and I'm like, oh.
Get me where you are now then. Let me understand.
I mean, I think we'll speak to it briefly, and we can definitely coordinate someone from EDC Land Use coming in who can speak to it in a lot more detail. But my understanding, as was stated, as a sort of as a part of the agreement, was for the city and the state to swap the land, and for the state to take ownership of Howland Hook and the city to take over BMT. Going through the GP process was a condition that was made in order to move that swap forward. And some of what I've heard from Mike Stamatis at the Brooklyn Container Terminal is like the Port Authority have been trying to sell off BMT and close the port for many, many years, and that the Staten Island site is a much better and strategic site for the Port Authority to own. And so it sort of right sizes both operations and opportunity for the city and the state. Again, we've gotten a lot of feedback on sort of GPP overall, and I think it'd be best to bring in someone from EDC who could speak to it kind of more directly from the city's perspective, and we could arrange that for the next meeting.
I mean, the one thing I'll just say is regardless of the process, I think we can, when we put the process in the parking lot, specifically the decision around GPP versus ULURP in the parking lot, I don't think that changes necessarily the input of this committee. Right, regardless of how the decision is made in terms of from a governance structure and a formal approval structure, I think the input of this group about how the land should be used in order to benefit the community more broadly, that's not going to change. It's just how it gets approved that changes.
Let's say the Botanic Garden, what they just went through. If that was a GPP, they wouldn't have been able to stop that.
Yeah,
The city council was able to stop
But
that.
can I say that as the Cobble Hill Association, what we always feared was a ULURP on that site, because a ULURP is often done way ahead of time before it ever comes to the public. So we always feared that we would wake up one morning and it had been decided that the Port Authority had sold it off to XYZ developer, and that, they already had a plan for it, and that they were going to start the ULURP process, but the plans had already all been made, and they had met with Department of City Planning already, and they had gained input from all the stakeholders behind the scenes, and now it comes to the public. And that is much more terrifying, because a lot has already been cemented before we as the public get a chance to say anything. if everyone's being honest at these meetings, it does not appear that there is a plan that has been pre-baked. We do not know of any developers who have already been chosen or on a short list. So I just want to bring that forward, John, that to me, that's why I think there's opportunity here.
Both processes have pluses and minuses, honestly. They both do.
Right.
Really.
How do you stop? But I know you can stop the unit process at the city council level. You can, but how do you stop?
There's
the
been member
GPP? Like, I don't know how you stop a GPP.
Authorities Control Board, like what happened with Amazon in Queens.
And State Senator Ganotis is the person, he's on vice chairing the task force, and he's the person that would
You can
have
also
the
sue them.
deference.
That's correct.
No, seriously, right? No, I mean.
Your lawyers.
I want to keep us moving just because
Yeah.
there's a lot more
I'm
to
gonna
get
keep-
through. Maybe just one.
No,
It's comfortable.
I'm fine, actually. It's like-
Everybody likes this temperature?
Oh, yeah, I'm good.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
I think one critical thing that this question has come up is sort of, we're moving towards consensus. Like, there's no big reveal of scenarios at the end. We're gonna talk, like the task force is gonna talk about opportunities and constraints. Then we're gonna move into sort of site-specific potential, different land uses. From there, we'll start to build out potential scenarios. And then from there, move into a preferred site plan. So it's definitely, we're starting big picture, exploring different opportunities, exploring different land uses, and then really narrowing down to scenarios first, and then to a preferred site plan. So folks will have a sense of how this is evolving over time if there's no kind of reveal at the end. I'm gonna keep moving just because there's a lot.
You touched on some of
We
it.
touched on some of this. I think you all know who the leadership is.
Raise your hand if you're on the task force. There's several of us
There
there.
are- Yes.
Yeah, so.
Exactly. And the real role of the advisory groups is to really provide feedback directly on the plan as it emerges and as it develops, specifically from your perspective. And so that's, I think we'll have more sense of how that looks as we get new information as the planning team moves forward. But today's conversation is really focused on sort of bigger picture, initial priorities and concerns. I'm anticipating that in December or early January, we'll start to get into some of those site-specific ideas and have you all respond to some more specific spatial information. And then in meeting 3 in February, we should have those final scenarios for you to feedback on to the task force's discussion and decision around a final site plan. I'm going to talk very quickly about the public workshops. I don't want us to get stuck on this. I am happy to speak after, or we could set up a separate meeting. This is just a photo from Public Workshop 1. This is at the Mikio Center. It was really about sharing information about the site, given that it's secure, people can't get in, explaining the planning process, getting high-level feedback on sort of priorities and concerns. We imagine Workshop 2 being sort of presentation, Q&A, and small group discussion. We want to introduce case studies, acknowledge and integrate past planning efforts, and start to get more specific on some of the potential land uses and site constraints and opportunities. From Workshop 3, and I don't want people to be confused by the image that we're showing. This is just from another workshop where we've used a model to engage folks around trade-offs when you're thinking about site planning. So the model that we're building is a 2-scale model of the port. So it will be specific to the port and what's there now. And then as we think about potential land uses, we'll create buildings that represent whether it could be housing or open space or industrial or flexible maritime space. And so
3D SimCity.
3D, exactly, SimCity.
Dating myself.
And it's an opportunity for people, it's an opportunity for people to understand what's on the site, but most critically, understand the trade-offs between different decisions. If you add housing, what does that mean for the port? If you add open space, what does that mean? And so that's a tool that we're building.
I have a question about that. Does that work where this is like a way oversimplified example, but if we were to say, okay, the suggestion is it's 30% housing, 20% open space, and the rest whatever, are the little game pieces that you build to scale so that people can actually
Yes,
base those and see what that would
that's right. And without
They look like-
getting too in the weeds,
Yeah.
there's a corresponding web tool. So the facilitator would be inputting. So let's say you wanted to add 5 acres of flexible maritime uses.
Yeah.
And we would input that into a web tool and it would sort of show an output of what that, how it impacts the overall site.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you.
And again, don't be confused here by the image, but the idea is that we have a set of final scenarios that we bring to the public and they're able to give direct feedback on and prioritize as well.
But those are set.
So when you get, my sense and our sense is when you get to this stage, there's still the opportunity to refine or have a hybrid. You know, let's say there's 2 scenarios at the end and there are aspects of A that folks like and aspects of B, the planning team and the engagement team can go back and say, well, how can we actually combine those to build a hybrid? So I don't want to, yeah, the scenarios that are shown at the end will not necessarily be the final scenario, but it is getting closer to that final site plan. Okay, I'm going to move quickly through this. We've engaged around 1,800 folks to date, 400 folks at the virtual session back in August, a little over 300 folks, or around 300 folks at the public workshops, and over 800 folks to the initial survey. And we do plan to have a second survey towards the end of the process when there's more specific information and scenarios to respond to. These are just photos from the 2 workshops to date. These are some of the emerging.
Where's John?
Yeah,
I think that was you.
Was it?
oh yeah, that is. I didn't.
The surveys, the surveys, right?
Yes.
Are we ever gonna see what people responded to those
Yes.
surveys?
Yes, and
On here?
to our to apologize again, that is part of the pre-read. For one, there's more detailed information about the survey in the pre-read, and we're also going to be releasing a public summary of all the survey data, hopefully in the next week or so.
Thank you.
These are some of the emerging themes. I think a lot of you are probably familiar with these, but a lot of enthusiasm for park space, big concern over just climate resiliency and sustainability overall, and increasing flood protection and integration with the Red Hook Coastal Resiliency Project, which I know the city is coordinating on very closely. Obviously, traffic and transportation are huge challenges in the area. And so folks are definitely interested in improving transit options both to BMT, but also for the surrounding community. A lot of feedback around just truck traffic and traffic in general, especially as it relates to the BQE. In our initial engagement, we've seen a lot of concern specifically around the potential for luxury high rises on the waterfront, thinking about places like Long Island City, Williamsburg, and folks have generally sort of shown support for affordable housing, and particularly affordable housing for folks living in Red Hook in particular. And folks have raised wanting to think about opportunities to leverage the redevelopment of this site to increase funding for NYCHA as well, the Red Hook houses. I think there's definitely a tension emerging in the engagement around sort of wanting to preserve the working waterfront, given that there are so few sites around the city, but how do we do that thoughtfully with other uses nearby? Definitely strong support for maintaining and supporting small local businesses. Sort of mixed feelings over the cruise industry. I think folks represent how much revenue it generates for the city. It's one of the bigger revenue generating opportunities on the site right now, but a lot of concerns around the traffic that comes with it. And then, workforce and job training. Folks definitely want to see this as an opportunity potentially for like a live work neighborhood with Red Hook, thinking about maritime and climate and sustainability related careers as well, kind of prioritizing folks in Red Hook in particular for those opportunities. Okay, any questions? I want to just keep going so we can move on to the open discussion. Some of you all will have seen this before, but I think it's important just to reshare what's coming out of the planning team. So today there's a lot of non-maritime uses on the site. And there's significant infrastructure improvements that need to be made. But the site is very large, as you know, it's 122 acres. So there's a lot of potential flexibility for multi-purpose solutions. Right now, almost half of the site is currently non-maritime. We found a lot of feedback and criticism on this site, and we hope to continue to update it. Particularly 9A and 9B are listed as non-maritime uses, but that's largely because the Port Authority let those fall into disrepair.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. So the Port Authority was disinvesting in this site for decades.
Right.
And so those Piers 9A and 9B they were condemned in September 2023.
So non-maritime use means it cannot be used for like shipping or.
Yes.
So the beer distributor is there.
Your distributors can.
Oh, 7, I'm sorry, I'm at 9.
8.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But 9A and 9B were the ones where the gravel was coming in and stuff on barges. I don't know if you.
Is that where the
aware of it.
concrete recycling plant is now?
That's towards.
That's
Sorry.
No, it's okay. No, this is good. So, this is, so yes, this is
Right, that's,
7.
that's
This
right, I'm
is
sorry, that,
here.
yeah,
It's considered non-maritime right now because Manhattan beer doesn't receive any goods via barge. They used to when it was Phoenix Beverages, but
Right.
currently
they get it by truck.
they get it by truck and it goes out by truck.
When does it lease expire?
I don't know offhand, but I can get that for you.
They re-up the 5-year lease, but.
Really?
And I think worth also just calling out this
Yeah.
MARSEC zone, which is a secure zone. And so, there is the potential if the MARSEC zone were to shrink to increase public access, that's also on the table.
Okay,
So something I learned just about the MARSEC zone, because it's very confusing. I've learned 2 facts that I just would like to share with the group.
Yeah.
While non-public uses can't happen within the MARSEC zone, that doesn't mean that commercial or other
That's correct.
industrial can't occur within that MARSEC zone. That's one. Second, if the maritime, and this is what I learned on the office hours the other day, so if I'm wrong, this is what Jim Timpaka said.
Yeah, okay.
If the maritime use is not bringing in something from an international ship, but rather it's domestic, it's coming in from New Jersey to then go from a hub to the Blue Highway,
Right.
there doesn't need to be MARSEC zone for that. So if right now, we're getting ships at the marine terminal that are coming in from international, we've got customs, so the MARSEC zone is there. But if there was a maritime use that wasn't international, that MARSEC zone would change.
That's correct.
Sorry, I was very confused by that, so
Thank you.
sharing.
thank you.
This is just highlighting, as you all stated, 9A and 9B have been condemned, so they're fully out of commission. And part of the $164 million mega grant that the city won is to reconfigure this as a marginal pier, which is a pier that is parallel to the shoreline.
Like the ones out there.
I'm sorry. I just want, all the funding that you've been talking about, is it secure?
Yes, no, that's a great question. So my understanding is the mega grant is secure as long as we continue to meet the sort of timeline that is required for it. Obviously,
It's not contingent on the federal government?
my understanding is that everything is in place to maintain that funding. I have no one's indicated otherwise. Future funding, obviously.
Yeah,
we don't
right,
know.
exactly.
And there are other pending grants.
So is that a given that
Right.
we have to take in? Is that those
Yes.
finger piers are no longer going to be?
That
there?
is correct. That is correct. I think, yes. So, but yeah, I think it's important to call out sort of what is fixed and what is not fixed. EDC has communicated that the grant money here will be used to build a marginal pier at the site. What use is there, whether it's container terminal or other flexible maritime uses, we don't know. That hasn't been decided, but
Whether it's international,
See-
domestic.
That's funny because that's been determined already, right? So these are the things I'm saying. There's things that have been determined already that we're not debating that. That's going to be a marginal pier, whatever. So, there's just little things.
One thing to know, just so you know, though, no housing would have been able to be built on that site anyway. Okay, there are certain sites that will not support housing because it's a pier, right?
Well,
It is not it's not on.
Well, not on the water side, but on
the
the,
way we do housing now, Michelle, but other places around the world do have housing that goes out over the water.
That's true.
So while they could be on those piers, it doesn't mean that we can't have housing out over the water.
True.
Do you guys have
The cost prohibitive nature of affordable housing.
like a map of the space that has the areas that are fixed already and what's not?
we can, we can develop that. I mean, I think really the only one.
We have like
There.
current consideration and then.
That's right. That's right. This is, as far as I'm aware, this is kind of the only sort of fixed constraint.
Well, along with the tunnel, which you, which are.
Yes, yes.
so
That is
where can housing go? Are we going to get to that?
I think that's still up for discussion. There's no specific proposal. I mean, are you talking
Where
about?
can housing not be? Because we already mentioned.
Where is it feasible?
Oh, got it.
versus
Got it. Like physically feasible.
So
This.
are we going to get to that?
Yes, this slide sort of outlines, I think, what you're getting at, so the hatched in yellow here shows construction load limitations, where I think sort of the early thinking from the planning team is that, it would be really challenging to put housing there, as Michelle's highlighted.
I mean, I don't think anybody thought that with housing on the piers, there's land there and then the pier.
The upland.
Yeah, I think this is part of what we want to
Yeah.
discuss. Yeah. But yes, highlighting the Hugh Carey Tunnel here as a site constraint because dredging here is limited because of the tunnel's location. And the planning team has indicated that large ships are not able to cross, although I've heard different feedback from that, from people that are more familiar.
Chris, do you mind just?
Yeah.
Like, let's define finger pier versus marginal pier
Yeah.
for everybody.
Yeah. So this,
Yeah.
this is a finger pier. It runs perpendicular to the shoreline. So the pier 7, 8, 9A, and 9B, those are all finger piers. And then a marginal pier is here what you have at pier 10. So it runs parallel to
It's
the
like a
shore.
parallel parking versus,
Exactly.
head-in
That's a
parking.
great analogy. Yeah.
So what's the thinking behind changing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I have a basic understanding, which is that there's just more utility out of a marginal pier. It's more flexible for the port in terms of ships coming in and out than the finger piers.
What you just said about there's conflicting points of view about whether large ships can cross,
Yes.
that's sort of important to have a firm answer to, right?
Yeah.
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 Just because I don't know doesn't mean that the 12
You
people.
don't have to be a planner to know that.
But yeah,
I might play one on TV, however.
and I think some of the question is like, what is the exact size of boat that can
Yeah.
cross or not cross?
Okay,
Because-
so at some point soon.
Yeah.
Collectively,
That
we
level.
will know. Okay, all right.
And that's a great
You
question.
don't want to have happen what happened, what was it, the Holland Tunnel the other day when one of the contractors drilled a hole by mistake?
Oh, when they had the flooding and
Is that what happened?
happened?
That's insane.
Oops.
Yeah, you don't want the bottom of the ship hitting everything.
I'm just,
So once,
I just need to understand though, what I'm hearing is that we are only looking at this site as it physically exists today.
Hmm.
Other than removing the two finger piers of 9A and 9B. And I find that to be a huge loss in
Mhm.
terms of opportunity.
Mhm.
There's so much opportunity here. But if you're not going to reconfigure anything or make any sort of different changes other than add a marginal pier there,
Mhm.
What else would you suggest?
well, I mean, you could close in, like, why can't we close in this area here? You know, they're already identifying this as a constraint. Well, how can that be a constraint when we have no uses yet? You know, so
Mhm.
what do they think is gonna happen here? But why can't we close this up?
I mean, that's feedback we can take back to the.
You know, and
To create more land for different opportunities, you mean, rather than, yeah.
it just, you know, we can start to change configurations and, you know, if we're not gonna use these finger piers for any maritime uses, then what can we do to link them?
Right.
And if we have to get rid of these for a marginal pier, but a marginal pier doesn't give us enough in terms of maritime use, then why would we do that if we might be able to rehab these as some sort of open space or something without a heavy load?
Mhm.
So I'm just saying that I
Yeah.
feel like there are opportunities that if we don't look at the site from also an opportunity standpoint, but rather
Yeah.
what can we put on it as it exists,
Yeah.
I find limiting.
I agree with you. And that's what I want. Big, bold ideas. We got something huge to do here. 122 acres. It's never gonna get done again. Let's just do something monumental, something big here, something amazing that our grandkids can look back and say, look at what, this is what amazing what they did here.
I guess following up on that, thinking of those questions, I guess the question I have is, why was it determined that that was the best place for the marginal pier rather than other locations?
That's a question for EDC, definitely. I haven't seen the application for the grant, so I don't know.
Yeah,
How is EDC not here?
no, they are. They're on the, Betty,
Betty.
she's on the phone.
Oh, that's Betty. Betty.
John, I know with the screen share, you're not able to see me, but I'm definitely taking notes and bringing back some of the questions you raised.
And then, so the idea is that from that marginal pier that you guys are talking about, that's where this blue highway thing is gonna work from?
That hasn't been determined yet.
I
No.
mean, where else was it gonna work from?
Well, there's the other piers up towards the right.
The marginal
Here.
piers that are over here.
Yeah.
Yeah, this whole area.
But isn't that like, hey,
And that's what I was
it's there
saying.
now.
That was your point, Amy, about segregation between the kind of open space, public space uses and the maritime.
Yeah,
strictly
because
Industrial.
the
maritime
site,
use.
John, naturally kind of cuts itself in half.
Mhm.
Right at this point, which I also see as another opportunity for some intervention here. And I know we can't do infill because you have the tunnel. But there's also ways of, land bridges or whatever that we could do here. So, but my point is, John, that like here, that seems to lend itself to maritime use without a second thought. Whereas this opens itself up to a lot of opportunity for new uses.
What's there now? And that,
This is the cruise terminal and this is the
Ferry.
Red Hook
Container.
The container terminal.
Yeah.
that's not going anywhere from what they said, right? So those two things are there.
Right, that's what I'm saying. That's
And
why,
also has access to behind, road.
and you can get the larger ships
So
in
what is
because,
the, so other than, so in the half you were just pointing to, Amy, the Red Hook portion.
Yeah.
Got the container terminal, the ferry and the cruise terminal. What space is on the table as of right now on that portion?
That could be reconfigured, you mean, or that could
Yes.
be.
So
they're saying it all is.
But if you're saying that the cruise terminal is staying, which I'm pretty sure is,
Well, I think part of the question is like, is there a more efficient configuration of those uses that frees up some land
Okay.
for other uses?
okay.
But it's,
That's one question I have. And then the other question I have is, you see where like, there's, it kind of dots in and out, like the little jagged edges of different places? The privately owned sites or the roads and things like that?
Yes.
Like, I want information about all the ownership of those things. And why aren't we, that might be a good use of eminent domain. I'm not generally in favor of eminent domain. But maybe this is a particular, to make it more cohesive, it might make sense.
Yeah, and some of those are city owned,
Right, exactly.
so.
sorry, I just want to clarify what you said, Michelle. I think you just said your question or your interest, one of your interests is a more efficient reconfiguration of the uses on site. But then I guess my question is, that's assuming that the current uses must remain. Is there a possibility of the current uses not remaining? For example,
For maritime uses.
for maritime use, no cruise terminal, no container port, no, or even the non-maritime, like no beer distributor. I mean, what of that
Yeah,
are we really talking about, or can we talk about?
I mean, for me,
Yeah.
I would just say like, why do we have non-maritime uses in a maritime port? Like, get rid of them. Like, they should go someplace that's more appropriate. Like, we
Right.
have industrial business zones for those things,
Right.
right? And they should go to industrial business zones. And the city should help the relocation of those businesses so that they'll, because we don't want to lose those jobs,
Right.
right? But, and to me, it's like, take all the core maritime uses and including like figuring out what's needed for the Blue Highway, right? Because that is very important to get more trucks off the streets, right? And like, let's figure out how many acres that really is, and then everything else, what becomes feasible or cost effective for redevelopment.
And
I don't want to speak for EDC, sorry, but I think you'll be interested. I don't want to speak for EDC, but what I heard them say, especially Andrew Kimball, is that they definitely want to keep the cruise terminal
Mhm.
because of the revenue it generates.
Mhm.
And they definitely are keeping container
Containers.
usage there and specifically looking at fruit
Yeah,
and vegetables.
Mhm.
And that they would break them down at this site from a large container ship
Mhm.
and send it on barge
Mhm.
up to Hunts
Mhm.
Point
Mhm.
in the Bronx.
Mhm.
which is part of the Blue Highway concept.
Right.
So these are things that are being discussed, but I think one of the big things is that they are saying they need to generate revenue because this is not producing,
Mhm.
right? And we know that because the Port Authority got rid of it. But revenue generating is definitely a big push here.
Okay.
Certainly affordable housing is not going to generate revenue,
No,
right? So that's.
Right. Okay. That's just, it's just trying to get a handle on
Yeah, no, yeah.
what can we
That's why we're
actually
here.
be talking
That's why
about
we're here.
versus-
So, now that land, where it says on top of accommodate, who owns that?
On top of,
Accommodate, right on top of accommodate,
oh,
right at the end.
Over here, the edge.
this is the UPS.
That Fort Deference or whatever, is that,
This is the UPS site. Is this the site here?
are they trying to sell that?
I don't know the details.
I believe they were trying to sell it.
Check in.
I think that's a site for eminent
I know
domain.
EDC's definitely been in conversation with UPS.
I understand they don't want it. They're not gonna.
Right there, yeah.
As far as the blue highway, so long as it's cargo in and cargo out by water, okay, fantastic, beautiful. Our community cannot accept one more truck, not one more truck. It's ridiculous. It's just, it's back to back. It's just crazy. It's just craziness. Like, honestly, not one. If it's water, cargo in, cargo out, beautiful, fantastic. Let's do it.
But we would also say no more cars. Like they're adding so many more jobs and housing and other things here that we definitely don't want
Could be
1,000 more cars coming a day either. So.
Diesel trucks are even worse.
Okay,
I'm just-
exactly,
I
exactly.
want open space and.
But we want no more vehicles.
So there's,
Okay.
I want to bring us back just a little bit. There's just a few more.
The request for more details on the Blue Highway.
Okay, yep.
Understanding it. Where are the ships currently coming from? Where might they come from in the future?
Understood, yeah, but we can.
And what
touch on
those
that.
lanes are already, because you have Buttermilk Channel that's very narrow.
Yeah.
And there are already determined lanes in there.
And I guess just one point I wanted to return to that you're raising, sort of talking about potentially filling in land. And I think this is something which will be a bigger part of
It triggers certain federal,
meeting.
assuming we even have an EPA that cares.
Yeah, I would say there is state regulation around sort of over water building and sort of limits related to that. I also want to just inject, I think this will play a bigger role in conversations 2 and 3, is like all this comes with a cost, right? Like the infrastructure improvements, that reconfiguring the shoreline, all of that comes with a cost. And so how does that start to play a role in our thinking in terms of what?
We want to dream big now.
Exactly, I don't.
Down.
The mega grant is just a planning grant. I shouldn't say just, it's a big grant, but it's planning and implementation.
Yes, it is planning, but and my understanding is it actually does not cover the full cost of the marginal pier.
How much does it cost to create more than a bridge? I saw MTA elevator cost 100 million each one, they said, something, I know, what is it?
I'm gonna get through the rest of it. And then we can open it
Okay,
up for more discussion. So,
Okay.
um,
We're having discussion.
this is exactly what the feedback we want. So I think this slide really speaks to sort of the potential for future career opportunities at the site and workforce development. The port currently employs around 500 people, which is a generally low
Very
job
low.
density
Extremely low.
across 500 jobs
500 people.
across 122 acres. It's the low job density, especially when you look at something like the Brooklyn Navy Yard or other industrial areas. And so
Not like 5 people per acre.
there's
Bad, really bad. It's almost as bad as storage facility.
So this sort of speaks to kind of early thoughts around transportation in particular. I think there's a strong desire to think about how can we get trucks off of the neighborhood grid and potentially onto the site, and activating the city's Blue Highway network. My understanding, and Betty, and we can try to get EDC to speak more to this, is that the Blue Highway Initiative is still in its early stages of thinking and implementation. You know, I think there is a desire to potentially use this site as a node for the Blue Highway. So we'd have cargo come in. It could potentially be staged at a cold storage facility that gets developed on site. And from there, it could either go directly into Brooklyn and other parts of the city, or potentially going up to Hunts Point, which is our major fuel distribution center. And so thinking about barges of goods off the streets and instead going up Manhattan to Hunts Point in the Bronx.
Which advisory committee does the cold storage facility, like which scope does it fall under?
That's a good question.
Probably maritime.
Probably maritime.
Time industrial.
Yeah.
And also it came up a bit and yesterday with the BMT tenants and the port operator, thinking about what the site could be for the
Are
port
the
operator.
different advisory groups gonna be able to speak to each other at any point?
Yeah, so-
Like, if we have maritime people in the room, they could explain a lot of this that we don't know.
Yes, that question has come up a lot. So given that this is a volunteer opportunity, and it's a short timeline. We're not creating formal opportunities for all organizations to come together. Some of that is related
Why
to,
not?
some of that is related to the fact that there's nearly 70 organizations that are advisory group members. And so structuring that as a conversation in sort of one meeting is not, it's not really a
But
conversation.
even if you have one of those workshops with just people from the task force,
There's no reason why
But-
we can't reach out to anybody on this
Got it.
list, right? And
Yeah.
say, hi, I'm a member of this advisory committee. I'm trying to understand more about X, Y, and Z.
That is correct.
Would you meet with me or talk to me or, right?
Absolutely. We've already seen advisory groups who want to meet separately from WXY and EDC. The chairs are going to be in conversation with one another, or they've raised that as a potential pathway to sort of share ideas. We'll be sharing meeting notes across all advisory group meetings, so you can see what key topics and takeaways are coming up in each meeting. But I think so. It's a balance for us.
I don't know why you got to.
Every single advisory committee has the same challenge because there's overlap.
Let me tell you one thing. I think the EDC, right, has been used to a lot of other neighborhoods that are really rambunctious and the council members bite cops and all kind of stuff like that. And they don't realize that this is a very pragmatic, reasonable neighborhood. I swear, if you talk to them like grownups, people will behave like grownups here. I'm not gonna say nobody's gonna come in there and scream a little, but most of it is not gonna be, it's really not. And to keep everybody separate and then, not have anybody.
I don't think there's any intention of
Yeah, I
trying to
don't
keep
know. That's the
people
way it seems.
separate. I mean, there's so much overlap across all the advisory groups. So we encourage folks to share. We're not trying to.
I can't get in touch with Maritime. I don't know them. I'd have to Google them, try to, you know what I'm saying? Like you.
Remember too, though, that I hear what you're saying, John. We can think more about it for sure. Remember too, that at the task force meetings that, several of us are on the task force, those other members of those other advisory groups are on the task force too. So some of that is coming, like there are multiple places where it's coming together. I think what you're asking.
What about the advisory group?
Is at the advisory level. Yeah, so we should follow up.
We can ask the chair if she would call a special meeting for us with a few of the maritime
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
This slide is maybe most specific to our advisory group. So this is showing sort of nearby neighborhoods, new housing that has been developed over the years and some housing losses.
We have a whole 300.
Rent burden in the area is at 35%, while of course that is too high and it's lower than the citywide rent burden of 43%. We've already got a lot of questions to sort of clarify some of this data. So I'm planning to follow up with our teams and the planning team. Michelle has also requested a lot of additional information to inform this conversation related to development in the pipeline, AMIs for a lot of recent developments. And so there's an outstanding request to EDC and HPP.
And I would add what regulatory agreements are expiring.
Say that again?
What regulatory agreements are expiring?
I know about that. So the minus 37, what does that mean exactly? Those, you,
37 units were lost.
how do you lose units? Like, what do you?
Yeah, people buy a multi-family townhouse and turn it into a
Frankenstein.
single family.
Rent burden is percentage of your income.
I mean, I don't know, but
Correct.
it's what quickly comes to
I
mind.
didn't know if it was affordable or retrospective. It's just any unit. Okay.
It's just any-
We've had
Anything over 30%.
Okay.
I think another data point is how many buildings are rent controlled or rent stabilized? And who are the owners of that building? Nonprofit versus private.
Understood. Yeah, since folks have also raised wanting to understand plan development, which I don't believe is incorporated into
When
this.
you're looking at community board 6 as your,
I need to.
yeah,
double check
because
that
I mean, obviously,
attachment for this.
Yeah.
if you're including public housing, for instance, that's why rent burden is only 35% here versus 43%. And so if that's the case, I would do it with public housing and
And
without
without,
public
yeah.
housing.
Know that.
Yeah.
Because it's going to skew
It's
it.
going to skew it big time.
This came up yesterday in the Maritime. Group.
Yeah.
Someone from Red Hook Initiative was like, that does not seem right.
Yes.
Clarify.
Yeah.
Obviously, resiliency will be an important aspect of this project. You have the Red Hook Coastal Resiliency Line, you can see in the red dotted line. And so I think the sort of early thinking is how can we incorporate and build and integrate that work with whatever resiliency improvements go into this site.
What is the Red Hook Coastal Resiliency Line? What does that mean?
Yeah, so I believe it was in response to Hurricane Sandy, the Department of Design and Construction has basically built a set of flood walls
Okay.
in Red Hook as flood protection. And it's kind of nearing the end of its planning and design, I think they're starting construction soon. And so I know there's definitely an interest.
To elevate.
Okay.
But what's unfortunate there is, is it's sandbags inside of rebar. So it's not something that's necessarily aesthetically pleasing or infrastructure that you can do something else with.
Yeah.
Which is really unfortunate. And I think when we talk about resiliency on the other end, again, this is where the site divides itself out again, is yes, when we talk about resiliency on this end, I think we really need to look at multi-purpose, functional
Yeah.
infrastructure.
Right.
For
Absolutely.
some reason, I'm fascinated with the UPS piece of land. Why is it white on the edge? Like, yeah, why is it white there and then it's blue in
The
there?
blue is showing storm surge.
Third,
But why would it not be on the edge?
Some areas elevated, really elevated.
the
There's
build up.
differences in topography.
Listen, eminent domain, take that from UPS. We need that.
I'm with you on that.
We need what's missing right there. We need that. They're not gonna use it anyway. They said they're not gonna use it.
No, it really is.
Yes.
Makes
They don't
sense.
use it for storing trucks or whatever right now, or they do? I'm not suggesting that's a great use. I'm just asking.
They do.
Honestly,
And
that's
I
a
think.
great piece of land right there. Look at it.
She no longer represents us, but I think she would say 100% yes on that.
That's a great piece of land right there.
Yeah.
And it sticks out. There's a little piece on the end, right?
There's just a couple more slides and then I think we can start to dig into the specific questions, but this really just highlights, I think, sort of existing public access. There isn't any, and the greenway that runs along the edge of the site. And so that's definitely a big theme that's emerged in our early engagement is a lot of support for parks and open space, a lot of support for expanding waterfront access. So I think that will be a big part of this conversation moving forward.
And that, I think it would be helpful here to also know which of those green spaces are active versus passive.
Yeah. And also how many of them are green and how many of them are actually hard.
Like a hardscape versus. And then this is the last slide, and I think trying to sort of frame the context, frame the conversation within the fact that this is a really large site. It's 122 acres. It spans several neighborhoods. And so, some of you have raised this already, but what is the balance? How can we achieve the sort of wide set of goals that the city has set within the site, and also center belonging and accessibility, given that Red Hook has seen a lot of disinvestment over decades. Okay, I think that's.
I feel like we could ask.
Now we're at the discussion.
Listen, the Columbia Street waterfront has no access to water. Can you please get us some access to water?
Well, none of us
I want
have.
to sit on a bench. Well, you can join me. We can sit on a bench and we can watch, please just try. I've heard of crow's nests that they on top because I know there's consideration. I don't know. Figure it out.
Actually, that's actually, there are lots of examples around the world of public access, even over, maritime uses.
There's a wonderful book on Amazon, but it costs $70. Can you expense it? I want to check this book out. It costs $70. It's all about waterfront. Amazing.
Library.
I don't think they have it. I don't know.
Well, you can request it.
Okay. It's expensive.
They'll bring it in from another library.
And then when you say green space, there's a few things that EDC and just for my community, I'm gonna speak, could do some stuff. You guys don't have the best reputation there. EDC does not. Because of certain things, get the concrete recycling out of there. Like, just get it out. Please just get it out. You can close it down tomorrow. If the health department finds something at a person, they just shut it down. It could be just shut down. God forbid we don't recycle concrete for a month. But when people get sick, they get sick forever. Like, just please do that.
Keep putting pressure on them.
I will.
Well, at the very least, move it from within a certain radius.
It shouldn't be bordering a residential neighborhood. It just shouldn't. It shouldn't be across the street. Like, it's horrible.
No, it's
Yeah, it's
terrible.
very bad.
So you guys have the power to do it. Look, in my area, they don't distinguish between EDC and the city. They say the city.
Department of Sanitation.
You know what it is? But everybody, they have all these organizations and
Yeah, I'm sorry. I can say DOT.
Yeah,
my community just looks at it as the city.
right.
Whether it's EDC, DOT, it's really DOT. All of anybody, just get it out. Then in all of this, you never see Portside. Portside, right, is an award-winning organization. They've been treated very bad by EDC. They do phenomenal stuff for the community. It's the only resource that we've had to bring us close to the peers at all, at all. And really, there should be some space made for her, you know, for the Mary Whalen and whatever. And I mean, find awards from the White House, like Jesus, and you know, and she's been treated very, very bad throughout this process. And I just feel like somewhere in there, when you do waterfront access or whatever, she had a whole park. She's done phenomenal things. I don't know if everybody here is familiar with
Right,
her.
yeah.
And we should, you know, encourage that and her as much as possible.
Well, there's an opportunity for some kind of open space that ties to history and maritime uses.
And educational, she
Right.
does a lot of education.
So do you want to go to the questions in the group discussion?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, we've got around a little more than half an hour, and I think obviously there's so many of these issues are intersecting, but to try to focus it on the housing piece, I think would be helpful. You know, this is our opportunity to inform early thinking, the planning team's early thinking, and so we want to hear from you on what's important to consider as we move forward.
Well, I mean, you did say that you heard, you know, people don't want towers. And I think it's the
Or
model
luxury.
of luxury towers in a park. Or with open space that doesn't allow access. You know, they call access a 6-foot pathway to the water. That's not access. We're talking about real access. So I think from our standpoint, what we would like to see is, you know, variation in housing types and sizes. Because, you know, as you know, if you do a tower of, let's say, 50 stories, that's a lot of, you know, FAR, but you could spread that FAR out. You have a lot of space to work with, right? So I think that's why when I said about the 10-minute or 15-minute neighborhood, I think we really see an opportunity here for a neighborhood with different types of housing, different types of people. So affordable, I think we need supportive housing on the site. I think we need to break this paradigm of people not wanting formerly homeless people or formerly incarcerated people nearby. When the proof is that when you have housing and you have community, you can lift yourself out of situations. And I think that we need to, you know, it's not going to be easy for us to sell that in to Cobble Hill, but at the same time, you know, if we come to agreement on that and the task force comes to agreement on that, then I think it's something that we can get our communities to go along with. But I think it's really important from a diversity standpoint, which you said is, you know, one of your words, and balance and other things is we really need not one type of neighborhood with one type of person or people, but real idea of a real New York City neighborhood.
You can go.
Yeah, just something I was thinking about that for me to help understand this part of the conversation. And I know Andrew mentioned in the first task force meeting is like a priority is revenue generation.
Yes.
And I think, I mean, that to me is like, that's a big question. I think presumably EDC has their own calculus about like what that means. To me, the understanding like what their framework of revenue generation means really informs like like a cruise terminal. I mean, I don't know how much you said that is generates a lot of revenue. Like having that would that offset like the need for a certain type of housing? You know, I feel like all of these play into each other, and so I think there's different scenarios around like what revenue, like presumably EDC would like to maximize as much revenue as possible on this site, but also that means trade-offs, I think, for the different uses. So I don't know if that's a request I can make, like kind of what they're thinking in terms of, obviously there's existing costs.
Right, is it just the maritime portion that needs to be self-sustaining?
Yeah, and then on top of that, like,
But housing, it's, I mean, unless we're going to give housing rent free, it is income producing. People
Right.
pay for their housing. So it's how much, of course, but as we know in our building, it doesn't take much rent in order for somebody to actually produce income after costs. And so, and not only that, the housing and the infrastructure for that community of housing, whatever other kinds of activities that are built around it to create that kind of neighborhood and community, because otherwise they're an extra burden to the rest of the community. We don't want that either. So, I mean, there's many different ways of being revenue producing without looking very much in, like the typical, very commercial kinds of way of revenue producing.
Something that Michelle just said in a way that was, you say it and it sounds, oh, of course, reasonable, like other than maritime being self-sustaining. The issue is that I don't think that they are looking at this as maritime will be self-sustaining. I think there's a portion of the analysis where they are also looking for whatever housing or public uses or other uses on this site to also be subsidizing the maritime uses. I don't think that their idea is for the maritime to be self-sustaining. And I think that was something I raised when we were talking about the principles. I think we haven't gotten clarity on it. And I think for the work that's being done in this group, I think that's a really important piece of information. And I understand that we will all benefit from the climate change and by having the blue highway, that's great, but it's not just us, that's citywide. You want to have like tax subsidies from the city to help that, great. But what happens on this site, what affects our neighborhoods, we shouldn't be bearing the cost of subsidizing the maritime uses. So, and I think that's relevant to what we are discussing here in this room.
Yeah.
I think, first off, my first advisory group, so forgive me if my suggestions are outside of the scope. But I think before we kind of really dive into the meat of it, I think it might be helpful, at least for me, if we can come up with a set of goals and objectives that we're driving towards, and that we can hold ourselves accountable throughout the process. And things just like, the percentage of affordable housing we want, how much housing we want. I don't know if these things have been discussed already, but I think that will help kind of define our strategy and whatever plan that we end up going with. And that being said, I do have a number of suggestions. One, I was just kind of looking into the redevelopment of Gowanus. And I noticed that, or I was reading that they had a stipulation for all the housings that they had to add, all the specific houses had to build a part of the Esplanade. And I think that would be just kind of in terms of kind of integrating integrating green space into housing. I think that would be a lovely suggestion. And it takes a little bit of burden off of the city EDC and puts that on housing developers. Obviously, if it's a for-profit versus nonprofit, you have less resources or more resources to kind of actualize that. I think another thing that I was particularly interested in it, I come from an environmental background, but making sure that the housing is sustainable. I think housing is obviously the intersection of a lot of different issues. And I was just reading about this amazing affordable housing development, this passive housing development in East Harlem that was affordable. And I think, those are some certain kind of design principles that I would love to kind of use to guide some of our development. Obviously, climate change is a very pertinent issue right now. It's going to get worse. And so I think it would mean a lot for these communities to be able to kind of be resilient in the face of the challenges that they're facing.
That's a great suggestion. I'm just piggybacking off of what you just said. So in Gowanus, anything along the Gowanus Canal is subject to the waterfront access plan, the WAP, which requires 40-foot of publicly accessible esplanade that the developers need to build out. It's that along with the park that Fifth Avenue Committee and our partners are building at Gowanus Green, will create 18 new acres of publicly accessible open space along the Gowanus Canal. So that's huge. So in terms of your first question, in terms of like the, targets, I totally agree with you in terms of targets. I think we need some more information before we can get there personally. At least I feel that way. Because if the port needs to be 60 acres versus 30 acres, that really changes things for me in terms of the way I think about these things. Like knowing which, which things, where we have firm ground versus pier matters. Like, although it's feasible to do these things.
No, I understand.
It's
Yeah.
very costly,
Yeah.
right? And we, Fifth Avenue Committee would build and manage affordable housing. It is very costly. And every single time the cost goes up, it puts a lot of pressure on, either having more increased subsidy to keep the apartments more affordable, or government's like, oh, I'm running out of subsidy, or the federal government decides it's going to cut Section 8 or whatever's going to happen. And guess what? That means all of a sudden the affordability levels start to drift up, and it's no longer serving some of the income groups that Amy was talking about. So to me, that matters, like understanding like what's feasible and what the costs are associated with different levels of feasibility starts to determine like how much of an income mix or diversity we're actually be able to see in like our lifetime, considering where government subsidy dollars are at this point. So I would love to see, significant, like meaningfully significant affordable housing for a range of populations on the site, but like how much and what configuration to me depends on like how many acres we're talking about.
Yeah, how much space we.
But I think you could build in a principle, like no matter what you build, it has to have, X% that's publicly accessible, open space and things like that. And all of it should be built passive house as far as I'm concerned.
Another quick land use issue is that a lot of the uplands here are infill. So I think it's important to know what kind of foundations you could even get into the ground.
That'd probably just be slab.
Yes, go ahead.
Just thinking, is there ever a scenario in which housing, I feel like this sounds like a very anachronistic idea, but where housing is built and specifically either reserved or prioritized for people who are working on the site so that they don't necessarily have to be driving from somewhere else? And that could potentially also increase the likelihood where it does feel like a neighborhood because you both live and you work there.
Yeah.
Or is that like not?
If you have any government subsidy dollar in it, it triggers fair housing. I mean, no matter fair housing applies beyond just, publicly financed housing.
Right.
But, and so it's all via lottery. So there are ways to do targeted outreach to increase the percentage.
Right. But you can't really ever. Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, you can't guarantee, but there are, you can do things that help increase the pool, local pool.
Yeah.
I guess one question that I'm curious to hear folks' thoughts on, sort of height and density have come up a lot in early feedback from the community, and obviously more density can allow for more affordable housing or a wider range of affordable housing.
More open space.
And more open space. And so I guess I'm curious to hear from this group, like, how do you think about that balance of sort of like deeper and varied affordability with height and density? Just any thoughts on that?
Build, baby, build.
Looking at me.
Yeah, I think
I'm just looking this way generally.
I would want it to be as dense as possible. I think the denser, the better. And I personally don't really have any objections to height.
I feel the way. I was just gonna say, I think Amy was probably gonna say, we also have to, yes, increase like density, but also we'll need to make sure that this investment is being made in the infrastructure around the site. Yes, let's build, let's get more people there, let's have more affordable housing, but Columbia is a parking lot right now. Our schools are not sufficient. Where are these, we have to be big picture in the extended neighborhood when we're increasing housing on the site.
Makes sense.
And
Can we sustain now? So I guess that's part of the analysis, right? That we should get answers to. What could we sustain now and what do we need for each additional level, let's say, of like density increase level?
And just quick question for those guys who've been through this process before. If when you're planning such a massive, I guess, increase in the population of a neighborhood, is there coordination with the city to be like, hey, build new schools, build more facilities? No, and is there like a process, I guess, or?
Be like, well, there kind of is.
No, so it's, I mean, there's an environmental review, whether this is ULURP or GPP, there's an environmental review. And at the environmental review, which, you know, has its issues, and Paula can speak to this too, you know, if it shows that there's an impact, well, then those impacts should be mitigated. And part of what can happen here is a negotiation, right? About the timing or, you know, of where these investments happen in infrastructure and school seats are parts of infrastructure. I mean, in Gowanus, you know, there's on the site that Fifth Avenue Committee is building with our partners, there's going to be a public school. We don't know yet if it's going to be elementary, middle, or high school because we don't know the population is about to occupy the spaces, and then you'll know
What you have.
what we need and what we have, right? So, but that absolutely will have to be part of the analysis here.
But I think a big concern of the neighborhoods is the sewage and
Yeah.
water and the interceptor that runs along Columbia Street. Because there is a lot of basement flooding
Yes.
because of the system being overburdened.
Already,
And what's that?
already.
Already, yeah. So we found out in task force meeting that there really is not, there's a sort of infrastructure on the site itself that is not hooked up to the New York City grid system,
To the sewer system.
to the sewer system.
Has its own separate sewer system.
Yeah, what does that mean?
What that means is it's not flushing the toilet and whatever. It's really about drains with
Stormwater.
runoff
Yes.
and it goes out into the river.
Yeah.
Well, you can't have that once you have all of this development. I mean, you know, that's a big issue. So I think that we would really want to see from the housing perspective and use that this has a really unbelievable, you know, system for dealing with waste, water and.
I mean, one thing, people probably know this already, but the new building code requires, you know, any new development to detain, like any new housing we're building detention tanks in our properties. So that after the rainstorm passes, then.
It holds the water.
Yeah.
Your foundation becomes like a bathtub. It fills up and it's meant to fill up.
And then it just dissipates?
But after the storm has passed, you know, kind of a thing. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. No, like you know, what's amazing is that future development, people will be like, how is it possible that future development could be more sustainable than what is here now? Well, it's because, you know, of the engineering requirements that, you know, are very, very different today than they were when this was planned or not even planned decades ago.
Obviously, the whole area is very susceptible to flooding, but are there certain parts that are certain parts that more protected? There's that white area over there, which we don't have access to, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, I can definitely bring that back to the planning team. My understanding is that essentially the entire site is will flood and does flood during storms. Yes, it does appear that the UPS site is slightly elevated, strangely, but the entire site would need to be protected in terms of resiliency and stormwater.
Street flood during Sandy.
Yeah.
It did.
Say it again, I'm sorry.
Columbia Street? Yeah.
Street. Did it flood during Sandy?
Yeah.
Not like Van Brunt or down.
No.
like down
Not as bad.
Okay,
No,
but it
not
did.
as bad,
Yeah. Okay.
And we have the natural barrier of the trench.
Right.
Like, I mean, there is a rise up, but once you get there, it goes into the trench.
Right.
Yeah. That's why you see that hard line there, which
Yeah.
is really fascinating because that is the BQE up there.
But
That's another thing, Chris, tell them if they cover the trench, they could have some land up there.
Yeah.
Cover the trench first, please. You know, I don't know, with this new guy in, I kind of lost, I don't want to say I lost hope. It's different now.
I guess just, I know we only have about a little more than 20 minutes left, a little less. I guess one other thing that's just come up, thinking about other conversations is sort of like proximity of industrial uses to housing and how, even with the building that's on Emily Street, the condo building, there's a lot of complaints around like noises and sounds and lights. And so, yeah, I'm just curious if folks have thoughts to share on sort of like how we thoughtfully approach that if there's going to be housing
To think of
proposed.
some kind of buffer.
Mm-hmm. A buffer zone.
Yeah.
But we did hear on the tour that there's some sort of housing right on the edge of.
That's the inlay, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was yeah, there it is.
This building here was converted into
Mhm.
luxury condos.
And then I thought there was one on the perpendicular, not the horizontal line. No?
Not that I'm aware.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a BSA permit thing more than a decade ago.
Okay.
So two questions. So where are they looking for the cold storage facility?
No particular portion has been
You
identified.
guys kind of know what size and more or less where it would.
I think there's some early thinking around the size. I don't have it on hand, but I mean, my initial sense is that since you have, food and barges coming into the container terminal, that would be near or in the container terminal. From sort of like an operational lens.
Because I thought it would be over there where you want to do the marginal piers.
It has not been determined, so I don't want
And
to.
the grant money, right? So how much of it is coming and when? Because I think Goldman's thing said 2026, 2027, the bulk of it is coming.
I don't have the details on the mega grant, but we can get that
I
from
mean,
you.
like the 4 point something was supposed to be like in next year, and then the other 160, I think, was the year after. And then really leads to the question, why are we in such a rush if that money's taking so long to get here anyway? You guys gonna start working on it without the money? How does that work?
The planning.
It's the planning.
It's the planning so that when, an EDC gets.
And there's an environmental review.
We have to be, okay.
Takes
So
years.
how long is that gonna take? That's gonna take years?
I mean, that's a good question for
Inshallah, I haven't done it.
feedback.
Yeah.
2 years at least, right? I mean, for an environmental review process, or am I thinking?
That's when you talk to BQ, DOT.
Why don't we ask EDC
Yeah,
for
yeah.
the details on that?
Without major hiccups, like what do you think there'll be ground, shovel in the ground? I mean,
It's hard to estimate because the GPP process can vary in length. That could be a year. You have EIS process as well.
But you're talking about just for the federal grant, not just for the whole thing.
I don't even know what I'm talking about.
John, just think of it this way. You asked about the beer distributor. They gave them a 5-year lease extension, but said that they could drop in, like at 3 years, they're gonna drop in for a reality check. So to me, as a, let's just say a layman, that sounds like you got 3 years of planning they're thinking of before they get to any physical land use.
Yeah, and I think it's just worth calling out, this site would be developed over many, many years, 5, 10,
Great.
15, 20 years. So you might see some initial sites RFP'd in the next, 4 or 5 years. That would take.
And I think that goes back to what you were saying. I'm sorry, what's your name?
Hurry.
Arif. Maybe that's part of, rather than just percentage of housing and what kind, is also to say in phase 1, we
Right.
want X.
Mhm.
We want some housing in phase 1 and put it out that way. So it's not living with years and years of construction on maritime use before we ever see any community benefits or housing.
Absolutely,
Um,
absolutely.
I know we're very much in the preliminary stages, but has there been, I guess, any discussion or guidelines around the percentage breakdown of each, like open space, industry, housing?
No.
No.
And then who's to decide that? Like, when is that going to be
That's just
decided?
process.
But if we're not talking to each other, I guess it's really going to be, I feel like it
Well, to-
more kind of combative than complementary, I guess.
Well, I think to clarify, the task force will ultimately decide on the site plan, which would have, different land uses, and we'd be able to say, oh, okay, this site plan that got approved or is up for vote, has 30% open space and X% housing and X% industrial. And so that sort of final decision comes down to the task force to approve.
Mhm.
That's informed by these conversations all the community engagement that we're conducting, we're bringing that back to the task force and to the planning team to sort of inform their thinking.
Thanks.
Yeah.
What I would like to also know, since we are basically concentrating on housing here, is,
Well, community development and housing.
yeah, but I'm also saying is that, are we even on the same page? Because you were talking about wanting high rises and density. I do not. I do not want that on my waterfront, and I live right there.
I'm gonna tell you, I represent my community. I want what my community wants, not what I personally want. Because if it's my personally, I want community land trust and social housing, and I'm radical like that. But I want what my community wants, and the community does not support luxury high rises and.
How about if it's not luxury?
Yeah. How about
If it's not luxury?
Yeah.
That would be something to talk about. But I know they draw the line at luxury high rises, like, but other than that, I don't know. I would have to go back and.
Real height either. We don't want to turn into Gowanus, what that project's looking like. Looks like a nightmare.
I have talked to a few people on the waterfront, on Columbia Street waterfront, and what I heard was we're willing to have taller buildings there with other types of housing or buildings, as long as we get access to the water, have things for our community, have a vibrant, better community. Dealing with the traffic is a big issue there. And that, one person said to me, I'm willing to give up my views from my roof if I have a better place to live. So I think that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, that means that they're already wealthy.
I do want to clarify the expectation within the advisory groups. Like the advisory groups are not expected to come to consensus and sort of pass on a collective recommendation to.
Although if we did,
If
it
you
would be
did-
helpful.
If you did, you will gladly take that to the task force, but that is not the expectation, given that we're having 3 sessions over a relatively quick
The
planning.
thing is that, John and I have lived there for 30 years, looking at that space and stuff, and it is our neighborhood, and we do know our neighbors, and we do talk to them. So again, and that's what we're here, as I say, when I say I mean,
Yeah.
the people I represent.
I also live in the same building and I would beg to differ. So I don't.
That's fine.
It's.
Let's look at the survey.
A little bit
You did a survey.
dangerous.
Follow the survey.
Grouping everybody's.
You don't gotta believe me.
Well,
I was gonna, actually, Michelle, I was hoping
That's
you
what I'm
could,
saying.
so, one thing that I hate this about all of these processes, looking at Brooklyn Bridge Park here, whatever, like, there is a monetary component that matters, right? If you want to get a building built that is gonna have affordable housing, like, for the developers, they've gotta be able to this is just the way the world works. And I just want to make sure that we are, I don't like that it's reality, but there is some reality. And if we want to have that affordable housing there, and we want to have public spaces and we want to have these amenities, it's got to get paid for. And who is going to pay for it? So we have to, that's got to be we can't just have everything that we want. Because somebody's got to make money off of it for us to have what we want. And I don't like that that's the case. I know it's not the case for all housing, but it's going to be part of the analysis. And I wish it wasn't, but we have to live with that reality.
I would just, I'd say, listen, again, we build 100% affordable housing. We build 3-story buildings, preserve 3-story buildings. We build 29-story buildings. It's not just about that. There's some economies of scale. There's limited subsidy, right? It's the fact that certain programs that fund affordable housing work at certain scales, but not at other scale, right? Because of how it's financed. And so those are all factors. And I just want to put on the, one of the things that we do is we help to lease up affordable housing through the lotteries. So you guys, you might know about the Lightstone building on the Gowanus Canal before the neighborhood rezoning happened. 86 affordable units, over 70,000 people applied. Okay, 70,000 people, and that was before The EPA designated the canal as a Superfund site, right? Our libraries, Fifth Avenue Committee completed New York City's first 100% affordable housing over a new and expanded public library in Sunset Park. Please go see it. Over 60,000 people applied for housing, okay?
Yeah.
We
And
just
can I
went-
just ask,
I mean,
a studio in that building, how much is the affordable
we
rent?
have, I can't remember it, but we have rents for families earning 30% of their median income, 40, 50, 60.
Okay.
Right, we just finished,
So that is
we had a ribbon
really
cutting 2
affordable.
weeks ago for a senior affordable housing building in Sunset Park. It's project-based Section 8. People can have zero income and qualify, right? We had over, nearly 50,000 seniors apply there. Okay, the need is tremendous, right? So, I guess the question I would ask everybody is, okay, you don't want density, but how many people are you getting left out as a result? So that's the concern I have, because I see
Density
demand.
also creates, again, bearing of the infrastructure. And again, it depends upon how, are you going to create within that community its own infrastructure? Or is it going to be a burden on the rest of the community? We're a very small community. There's not a lot of infrastructure there. So, it's not a very vast, and especially when you get towards Red Hook, it's not a wealthy community. So the thing is, I think that's a lot that has to be considered when you're talking about density.
Yeah, no, there's no question infrastructure.
One more comment, then we'll go to.
Yeah, no, I just was gonna say that I think it was, even though we maybe spent more time asking these initial questions than we had for the conversation, I think that was time well spent, because I think we need to have a baseline understanding of what we're even dealing with, like what is the reality. I think one of the things I would ask for those of you who are, I'm gonna go back to process for a minute, who are designing the process, is to help all of us wrestle with those trade-offs, right? Because that's what's coming up now. It's like, it's always, always, always trade-offs, right? We can't have A, B, C, and D, but we can let D go because we think it's most important, or whatever it is. Like, as we get more information and we understand the lay of the land to help us, it's fine to have open brainstorming and what would you like to see? That's all good. But at some point, we have to understand what we need to prioritize and how, and what the consequences or implications of that are. And then I think we can really come up with something. We may not be able to all have consensus, but we can at least form our own points of view.
So I really appreciate that, because I think the second and third set of workshops will be focused on trade-offs and helping folks understand that. And I'm very personally very eager to get the financial analysis and market analysis of the port into the conversation, because I think that's going to have a big impact on how everyone's thinking and approaching this.
It's really interesting to know, and because we've been involved in trying to encourage the city to close the helicopter ports, some of which EDC maintains. And, one of the arguments has been, but it's revenue. But when you actually look at how much revenue it generates, it's, from our perspective, it's really not very much revenue. It's chump change or jobs. It's minimal. So an honest understanding of like how much revenue is being generated now or could be generated. I don't think revenue is a bad thing. We all need the city to have revenue to live here. But putting that in
Understanding it,
perspective,
actually.
understanding that.
Can I ask, sorry, go ahead, Michelle. Since you're involved in this, would you be possibly one of the actual developers? I mean,
I can tell you this, that when I was first approached to join the task force, at that moment in time, there was concern at the time. It was like, okay, if you join the task force, you might not be able to respond to an RFP. And I said, well, that means I can't join the task force.
Yeah.
Because if there's going to be affordable housing on the site, there's no question we want to be involved in building and preserving affordable housing. They were able to, by making every single aspect of this process publicly accessible so that anybody can see the transcripts and understand, that is the way they got past that and allowed those of us who may choose in the future to respond to an RFP to participate. So.
I can still put a bid in?
There you go.
Good to know, good to know.
Create your LLC. You're all good.
I got it already.
But it's good to know that, we can focus on preservation developers and not commercial ones.
The other thing I'll just say, and and this kind of like brings us back to the conversation about ULURP versus GPP. So had this gone through the city's land use process, mandatory inclusionary housing would have been triggered. And so one of the things that I want to see is that whatever affordable housing is created here is permanently affordable, right?
Yeah,
Because that is something that would have come through the ULURP.
yeah.
Great point.
Also, I mean, maybe this is something that you can provide to everyone, but understanding a little bit about how affordable housing is financed.
Yeah,
And the fact that it's so hard to finance it now when there was a time when it was really easier. And a lot of that has to do with the federal government.
Yeah.
And what we might want to do, since the congressman is the chair, is to push him a little bit to make sure that that he fights for some money for housing on the site.
Yeah, I mean, I can, as we're sitting here and I understand there might be varying degrees of like understanding about affordable housing or housing and how it works and things like that. I should do some additional thoughts, like happy to like schedule a tour of a site, like talk that we built recently, talk through how it was financed, Center for Urban Pedagogy. We work with them to develop like a what is affordable housing toolkit and like understanding AMI and which programs target which income levels and which
helpful.
Yeah,
I think that would be really helpful.
So we got to figure out when to fit that in here. But yeah, we could do that.
And just to let you all know, like I've worked with an architect who we did supportive housing for kids aging out of foster care.
Awesome.
And we put them in the penthouses of the building. And it was a nonprofit developer. It was not, it was community access. And the whole idea was to let these kids see that the world was out there for them. Like they deserve better. It's in Harlem.
Yeah.
And so there are models where it doesn't have to be like poor people on the bottom and rich people on the top. There are, and these are the things that we can say, like, okay, you can have luxury housing, but here are some things that you have to do.
There's a lot more rules around that now than there used to be. Like you can't put all the poor people on the bottom.
Yeah.
Right, but there are other ways around it too.
Separate entrances.
Separate them out, different buildings.
Condos.
Yeah.
Condo it out, yeah.
We're at time, so close this out.
We just started.
When's our next?
John was just starting to have fun.
Just getting comfortable.
Exactly. We'll be working with Michelle to schedule the next meeting, and we want to schedule it well in advance so everyone can join.
The pre-readout sooner.
Get the pre-readout sooner. But we anticipate sharing key takeaways from this meeting, updating everyone on the process. We should have some public workshop 2 engagement to share potentially. And I think Michelle will work to sort of talk through what planning analysis to share, and the planning team will also join the next meeting as well as we get more.
Yeah, and if you guys have, thoughts, questions, concerns between now and then, we all want to. So reach out.
Can we have, like, damn it, I forgot one name. Like the workshops, no more science fairs, please. No more science fairs.
The next workshop will not be science fair.
What's the format gonna be? Can it be a talk, like all of us talk? I forgot what.
There's gonna be,
Like a town hall, like a.
Yeah, so the workshop that we're planning currently will be presentation, Q&A, and small group discussion. Separately, Councilmember Avila
Why is it always separate? Why you always want to separate? Let's everybody talk.
and the assembly member have announced a couple of town halls they'll be town halls. They'll be different.
That doesn't satisfy me still. I want everybody together. I want everybody together on the same. I want to hear what everybody says. I want them to hear.
That's the town hall. That's why they're.
But it's saying separate, like this is gonna be separate.
Yeah.
We do, yeah, it's in the kitchen.
Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Together.
You haven't had enough chocolate or pizza, please help yourself.
I haven't had enough chocolate. I haven't had it. Definitely not enough. Thank you. Thank you for ordering the pizza.
Yeah, sure.
Have a pizza.
Thanks.
How you getting back?
Thanks, everyone.